episode 6. I've just had some comments from our colleagues that we're going to run out of fingers and whether we start to use toes and so on. Don't worry, we're not going to go there, but it's fantastic to be back with you, and we are so excited to be into our second book in this New Testament journey, the book of Acts. Absolutely amazing. We're looking today at Acts chapter 1 to 6. The book of Acts is Luke's sequel, his part 2, and we're going to see what it's about, and I'm super excited for this. So it's great to be with you, and I'm back with Tom. Tom, what's the kind of headline of what we see in Acts 1 to 6?
Well, I think there's two headlines I want to particularly put out, and the first one is, it's fascinating, isn't it? And you probably have heard this before, but Luke introduces the book of Acts with this sentence. He goes, "You'll know of my former book, Theophilus, of all that Jesus began to do until he was exalted or ascended into heaven." And the first thing to pull out from Acts, which I must say has struck me afresh this time, is that it's a book where Jesus continues to act. And Jesus has stepped into his authority, the fullness of his authority, but it's still Jesus acting throughout the book of Acts. And what we see Luke presenting Jesus as is the one who died and was resurrected victoriously. Over and over again in these first few chapters, we see the fact that Jesus rose from the dead and ascended into heaven, is him as the victorious one continuing to be active, continuing to want things, to initiate things, to do things, and who particularly chooses at a specific moment to pour out the Spirit upon all flesh. Yeah. And I love that. I love it that the Jesus of the gospel is the Jesus of Acts, and he's still there now, acting with his own initiative to pour out, to act, to do, to liberate. So maybe we're just trying to illustrate this particularly by grabbing one specific phrase or paragraph that Peter uses in his speech to the people after this crazy event has happened where the Holy Spirit has fallen, fire, rumbles of things, everyone's like, what? Yeah. And then he kind of explains it. I love this.
So this is Acts chapter 2, quote from Peter's sermon, beginning at verse 29. "Fellow Israelites, I can tell you confidently that the patriarch David died and was buried, and his tomb is here to this day. But he was a prophet and knew that God had promised him on oath that he would place one of his descendants on his throne. Seeing what was to come, he spoke of the resurrection of the Messiah, that he was not abandoned to the realm of the dead, nor did his body see decay. God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of it. Exalted to the right hand of God, he has received from the Father the promised Holy Spirit and has poured out what you now see and hear."
This is just so fundamental to what Peter thinks has happened and how he understands all of what goes on in the book of Acts. And the first point is really this. He's saying, you know this guy David, you know, like our hero, you know, like this king who really was the epitome of everything that we hoped God would do on the earth. You know this guy David. He actually saw somebody who was going to come who'd be better than him, and he has come. And he's like, Jesus is better than David, the most powerful, the most successful, the most incredible embodiment of the rule of God on the earth has been surpassed in Jesus. And he's speaking to people who would have sat there every year being like, who's our hero? Who's the one that we would love to be like? Who's the one we're praying to come? Oh, it's like David. We want one like David. David sums up everything that we would imagine to be great. Now, it's not a perfect analogy, but in my parents' generation, they would look and say, oh, the greatest Briton who ever lived, Winston Churchill. Oh, imagine if there was one like Winston Churchill. That's who we need now. We need somebody like that. Now, I understand that there's been, plenty of aspects of Winston Churchill that people have looked at and said that's not perfect. But it's that kind of feeling. They say, David. And then Peter's like, one better than David has come. And more than that, he says Jesus' throne is a superior throne to David's throne. David had a throne in Jerusalem and around which a whole court lived, and he did things, and Solomon actually steps into that throne, and you see an incredible picture of the rule and the kingdom of God in the Solomon. But what Peter basically says is that, but Jesus' throne is a throne in the heavenly realms. And he sits now not just on some earthly city, on some earthly throne with earthly rulers. He sits in the heavenly realms. He's been exalted to the highest place. And so his throne governs over not just earthly things, but all heavenly things, all angels, all demons, all principalities and all powers now sit, and they have to do his bidding. It's incredible. And repeatedly in Acts 2, in Acts 4, in Acts 5, in Acts 6, we see this phrase, they did signs and wonders, they did signs and wonders, they did signs and wonders. And the phrase signs and wonders really points to the fact that this king on his throne, when he says go and act and do, the things that happen because of his control and authority over supernatural and natural things, they're signs of that throne being in place, and they're wonders that you could look at and think, this doesn't, an earthly king couldn't do this. I couldn't tell you, Andy, go and make that person walk. I couldn't say to you, oh, feed this person with no food. But it's a wonder because it points to the fact that the throne of Jesus is, it's like, what? Like, whoa, that makes you literally wonder, like, wow. I've never seen anything like this.
Just, thinking about how Jesus reflects, fulfills, goes better than the life of David. I mean, an example like David's mighty men. He's got these 30 guys who go off and do great exploits. And we see a similar thing now, don't we? In the life of Jesus, he has his mighty men, these disciples, these men and women, they go out and they do great exploits. It's not killing Philistines, but it's plundering the enemy's territory, bringing salvation, bringing healing, bringing deliverance, great victories. So, and we could pull out a dozen like that, couldn't we, of examples from David's life. So it's a Davidic king, but beyond the Davidic king.
Yeah, and Peter, he quotes from Joel, the book of Joel. He slightly tweaks it. So in the end times, or in the latter days, the Spirit will be poured out. This amazing moment in which will change everything for the Jewish nation, where suddenly their kind of inability to live up to all that God's promised is transformed by this Spirit that's poured out on all people, all moment. Not just a prophet for a particular purpose at a particular time, but men and women, rich and poor, slave and free, old and young, like just all of us, we can receive this Spirit. And I think that Luke always, whenever he chooses a miracle story, he both shows that this miracle story is a historical fact that happened and we could expect to happen again now, and it illustrates a bigger point.
Yeah.
And the lame beggar who lies by the temple courts is a brilliant moment in these first few chapters. If you think about it, this is a guy who, it says, is carried by his friends and laid at the very entrance of the temple day after day, and he begs for money. And this symbolises really the predicament that came from the old covenant. David's rule. David has built the temple. It's David's temple, and it's a symbol of his rule, that actually somebody who is a lame person from birth, probably, that actually under that covenant, the only hope for them really is a coping mechanism. They'll get put at the entrance to the temple and they'll ask for money. Now, there was a vision from Ezekiel that from the temple would flow a river that gets deeper and deeper, and in that river would be the balm, or the leaves that would be the healing for all the nations. And it's almost like it's like this little image of just the tragedy of the predicament of David's rule. That this guy, who's an Israelite, every day is lying next to the temple gate, and there's no river that's bringing him healing that's flowing out of the temple. In fact, he can't even expect God's healing to come to him at all. Instead, he has to just find a coping mechanism. Give me some money. At least I can then feed myself. At least I can survive another day. And what Luke is pointing at is that there was a version of being human, which is hands to mouth. I just survive. I just find ways to get through the day. I exist. And maybe if I'm lucky, I can get enough money to kind of bring me a little bit of pleasure. And then Peter walks in and he's like, I don't want to sustain that kind of humanity. We've come with something that actually is the fulfillment of the Ezekiel vision. There is now flowing from the temple, not this building that you're lying next to, but from the temple that is Jesus Christ of Nazareth. There is a river of blessing that is flowing from him. And let me tell you now, in his name, step into that river. Get up, take your mat and walk. And the healing that's for the nations can swash over you, can heal you, restore your body, give you purpose and hope and life. You can become like a whole new way of being human.
Yeah.
And it's just like the most extraordinary thing. Can you imagine how exciting that would be?
Yeah.
But like, all the guys are with Peter and they're like, what? Like, this is actually happening. We're actually seeing this. There's a new way of being human. There's a new covenant. The end time spirit has come. Like, everything's different now.
Yeah.
The throne that we look to for help is not one where we just have to manage and kind of, I hope, if I could win Euro Millions, that would be really helpful. If I just get an increase in my salary, or if I just get enough money to pay my new gas bills, like if I could just do those things. It's like, no. Our throne is the throne from which this river of blessing flows. And if you step into that river of blessing, signs and wonders will come.
It's not. Yeah, again, it's like not even a new ruler in the line of David who kind of makes the temple functional again, is it? It's the fulfillment of the Ezekiel vision. It's like the end times poured out. Absolutely incredible. I think this New Testament journey is so helpful because we get the sweep, and so you see the story. I talked about it with Leslie last time. It happened, and it illustrates. He's like a documentary maker, isn't he? He pulls the example, doesn't make it any less true. If anything, makes it more true. He pulls the example that shows the truth that it's displaying, and wow, Jesus on his throne, pouring out the river. Absolutely brilliant. Now there is a scary one though, isn't there? Acts, just a couple of chapters later.
Chapter 5, yeah.
Ananias and Sapphira.
Yeah.
That's a fun one. What do you make of that then, Tom?
Well, I think, Jesus is on his throne.
Yeah.
Right, and he is establishing a new way to be human. Like he's saying, this is the release of my river of blessing. And this is the same Jesus who said there's a separation coming. Like he's the same Jesus who said, like, get in on me and I will release blessing to you, and through you I'll release blessing to the nations. And what we see in Ananias and Sapphira is two people who actually, they stand up and they say, yeah, we are now like ministers of the throne of Jesus. Jesus has sent us as his ministers. They're known as leaders in the church of God. That's a really important fact that you can easily overlook. They're leaders in the church. They're standing up and everyone's like, when these guys speak, they're speaking for this Jesus on the throne. But what they do is they actually manifest the kind of humanity that is of the old covenant. In fact, it's worse than that. They're basically saying, look, the throne that we look towards is the throne of money. It's the throne where you have to put your hand out and say, have you got any money for me? And it's like the opposite of what Peter's doing. Peter says, I haven't got silver or gold, but I have got this. And he releases the river of blessing. Ananias and Sapphira, they should stand there saying, we stand in the river of blessing. But what they say is, we don't have that. We don't trust in that. We don't trust Jesus to provide for us. We don't trust that this river is enough. Instead, silver or gold, give me. Let me lie. Let me pretend that I've given you everything, but I haven't. And Jesus is like, no, I won't have that. And actually, it's harsh. They die, right? But what if they hadn't been put to death? What if they had become some of the long-running leaders of this early church movement at this vulnerable stage? What we would then have is, at the core of our foundations, hypocrisy. It's something that claims to be Jesus and actually is of the enemy. And like, so I'm, as harsh as it is, isn't that just the most kind thing that Jesus could have done? To free the church from the hypocrisy in the leadership in the very earliest days.
I love that contrast with the lame beggar, and again it's Luke showing how it's upside down. You know, Ananias and Sapphira, they should have been in. They were the leaders. They were there. They had it. They've got everything. This lame beggar, he's got nothing. He's desperate. Who gets in? Who's on the wrong side of the separation? Lame beggar gets in. Ananias and Sapphira, they don't. So there's this river of blessing flowing, and we're seeing a bit of that going on at church at the moment, aren't we?
Yeah. I mean, it's just really wonderful, isn't it? When you think, hold on a minute, Jesus is taking initiative.
Yeah.
He's still doing the stuff he's done. So we've got some amazing stories. And this is just, I mean, actually we could go on for a long time with all the stories. I don't think I've known so many stories all in one time as it is now, as we're seeing now.
I think what I'm really enjoying is it's not just one spectacular meeting where 15 people get blasted at the same time. There's little pieces here and there in all different contexts at all different times, but within the same people. I mean, a little thing, we put it up on our social media. We do these Tuesday testimonies. Our friend Dilish, his son had bad back pain before the meeting. Dilish does the prayer meetings before church, and just in the ministry time prayed for his son, 9-10 years old. His son was healed. Just love it. And you think about how that builds faith in that family, how that builds faith in that child, how that will cause the river to flow further. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and I love the story of Kirsty, who shared just so wonderfully, openly, so vulnerable about a condition she's had from, I think she's about 10 years old, which would just make it extremely challenging to be in social contexts. A thing would happen to her, and it has a technical name which I can't remember, and I apologise for that, but would just kind of make it extremely challenging to be out, or certain noises she'd just have to recoil from and retreat from, wear earplugs a lot of the time. And she was saying she'd been prayed for by some guys in our church one Sunday, and the following week it was her partner's birthday, so they'd gone out for dinner together. And that sounds like such a simple thing, doesn't it? But she said for her, and she, like, tears in her eyes, she said, like, that is something that I could not have done. I could just not have gone out for dinner with my partner because I couldn't cope with the background noise. I couldn't cope with all this stuff. It would have been extremely challenging, and I've left probably halfway through in tears if I'd tried it before. But I went. I didn't need earplugs. We sat and had a nice dinner. Went home at the end of the night happy. And she said, "You don't know. You won't believe me, but that is a miracle in my life." And like,
river of blessing.
It's amazing, isn't it? There's more stories. Follows story about how she just always felt this weight on her from just some stuff from when she was a kid, that she'd had to be involved with this sort of ritual of a spell, which her parents hadn't known that she'd been involved in, but it just sat with her, this sense of darkness on her for a long, long time, and just prayed for her, and just this sense of, wow, this thing is this is lifting of a burden. And I don't know, but it feels like there's still so many of us who carry around like this heavy burden, this sense of darkness, like a shadow on our soul, like a pain in our head or a pain in our body, or even like the guy from Acts chapter 3, it feels like we have to have people carry us to places, and we just lie and put our hand out and think, if I can just get enough to get through the day. It feels like there's a lot of people in our world, in our town, in Croydon right now, and that really is the state of their day. And Jesus says, you can look to a throne that may just give you a bit of silver or gold. It may just give you a pat on the shoulder. It may give you enough to get you through a day and to exist for 24 more hours. But he's on a throne where there's a river of blessing, And if you come to him and keep coming to him, the healing that he has will reach you. It will take the shadow off your soul. It will take the burden off your shoulders. It will take the pain away from your head. It will give you forgiveness and life and joy in abundance. This guy who's lame, lying at the entrance of the temple, what's the one word that is used several times to describe what he does afterwards? Joy. He jumps with joy. He says with joy. It's joy. That's what the river of Jesus flows from Jesus' throne.
So there's a king on the throne, a new king that we see in these chapters of Acts, and he's better than David. And we also see this king is forming a people. We see a Christ-defined counter-culture. There's a couple of passages that are really similar, Acts 2 and Acts 4.
Just a bit from Acts 2. The church devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together, had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favour of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved.
Although just a fantastic passage. I do think the fact that Luke puts it very similarly twice, there is almost of a kind of template idea. This is the kind of community that this king leads and forms, and those kind of touchstone points. I mean, as a church, we've done a teaching series just off of this paragraph, because you can pull out the 7, 8, 10 things, however you want to slice it, and this is template, icon of what the community formed by the king looks like. It's just incredible, radical generosity. Luke has shown throughout his writings how it is good news for the poor. How it does turn everything upside down, whereas they may have looked at material wealth as a sign of blessing and favour from God. It's kind of upended, and it's shown that generosity, a freedom with money and with possessions, is actually a mark of a life and a community touched by Jesus, the one who came, had nowhere to lay his head, and yet made many rich through what he did. So there's this radical transformation in terms of money and finance. We also see that there are people of prayer, right? They give themselves to prayer, don't they? And that happens before the Spirit comes, that they are found in prayer, asking, waiting, and then the coming of the Spirit only pushes them further into this, doesn't it? They keep praying, they keep crying out. They're obviously defined by their love for one another. You get the impression that they liked being around each other. They were eating together again, following in the example of King Jesus, who came and who ate. We've said before, Gospel of Luke, it's like he's either coming from a meal, at a meal, or going to a meal, and they kept on in this pattern. It's a kingdom of a feasting, of bounty, and then it's a kingdom and a people marked by the hand of the Lord, and we see this again and again.
Love this stuff. Andy, what is it left you wanting to do? Like, what's it left you with? You kind of read this stuff and think, so what?
It's left me feeling more confident, actually, and that may sound a strange thing to say, not in myself, but more confident in this happened, this is real, this continues to happen, and it will continue to happen through Jesus' people. There's a funny little bit which Luke throws in. Again, it's just got the mark of history. This guy Gamaliel, and he says he's part of the council that's kind of punishing, wondering what to do with Peter and John and the other guys. And he said, "Look, we've had guys like this before who've gathered hundreds of men and caused an uproar, it fizzles out. It fizzles out. But if God is on them, then you'll be fighting against God. And obviously, we know the end of the story. It didn't fizzle out. And it just makes me think, like, multiple revolutions that happened. You've got, I can't think of a better word, theological, intellectual revolution of these guys, these Jewish guys. They were absolutely convinced that Jesus Christ was the Messiah. And that was not a convenient thing for them. That was not an easy leap for them. We've looked at it before, like, there's amazing prophecies in the Old Testament about Jesus, but they're not convenient. They're not like straight lines, but they came to be utterly convinced. These monotheists to the core. Like, it would have been an anathema for them to think there was this man, God-man, and yet they became utterly convinced of it. This theological, intellectual revolution, and then a sociological revolution as well. It hit person after person, and at this time in this place, so many of them would have known, oh yeah, I was actually at the day of Pentecost, and that did happen, or my uncle was at the day of Pentecost, and it spread from person to person. How do you know something's real? Well, these guys would have. My mum saw that guy being healed. He heard Peter preach. It's got the mark of history to it, and the sociology. It just fills me with faith, because then I think, well, actually, through the stretch of history and even to today, I know these people that we've shared testimonies of. I know people who have been touched by the exalted King Jesus. I'm standing near this river of blessing, and it's made me thankful, it's made me excited, it's made me think, yeah, there's ebbs and flows to this life. There's not always easy times. I think sometimes living in the UK or the West, you can feel like you get headlines about the decline of the church, but actually this revolution is ongoing, and it's because there's a great king on the throne, and he's still doing what he's always done with his people. So it's just filled me with faith this week. I wanted to keep going with it. How about for you, Tom? What was your big takeaway?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's such a heartwarming thing to see the reality of this in the book and in life. And I guess that makes me want to pray more. I think Jesus is actually there, he's actually actively present on a throne, and he's inviting me to go to him and ask him for things. Somehow me opening up my laptop and checking my emails feels like it's going to get less done than me closing my laptop and just saying, do you know what, Jesus, I'd really like this to happen. And I know there's a mystery to prayer, and I know that there's even Jesus himself doesn't say, instantly. It's like ask, seek, knock, keep on asking, keep on seeking, keep on knocking. But I'm so filled with yearning for and confidence in the power of prayer. And my feeling is that if we just keep on doing the things that we've started to do, to really look to this one on this throne and to try and live out of that place, what we've seen so far is just going to be eclipsed by what Jesus will do. I just have this in my gut, I have this sense that this could be a year genuinely when the hopes of many of us begin to feel like they realise, we begin to see like extraordinary things happen because Jesus chooses to act in response to the prayers of us and our parents and the generation before them, and just incredible things happen.